feel like in nutrition, just generally, it doesn't matter if you're talking about fats, doesn't matter if you're talking about, protein, doesn't matter if you're talking about antioxidants, plant levels, and all these different things. Every animal is going to be so different.
It's a lot of times we end up putting a ton of supplements in the food bowl. And I always wonder, do we actually need all of that, right? When we start assessing what are the things that our pets truly need? And also too, if we don't need to be giving that, it can help you save some money, which is really helpful, especially during times right now.
Ironically, I have a dog who just doesn't do well with dairy.
Yeah.
And so, but he does, have a yeast issue. And so I kind of I use all the same principles without dairy, and it worked. So I was able to clear up his yeast, and he's perfect now in that regard in terms of his ears and stuff. And so it just goes to show you can not do exactly the things that we talk about, but you can take those same principles and do something, similar.
First off, I want to introduce our amazing our guest today, Billy Hoekman. So Billy is the Vice President of Nutrition and Communication for Green Juju. He's involved in formulation, product development, working with farmers, science education, and sales and marketing. He participates frequently in experts panels and speaks nationally and internationally at venues ranging from universities and conferences to public libraries. He also serves on the board of directors for multiple organizations, attends AFCO meetings, and has numerous published articles. He's a trusted pet health advocate who specializes in turning hard to understand nutrition concepts into plain English. We all need a little bit more of that, right? So he lives in Lancaster.
Okay, you sound like you're from another country.
Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Somewhere in Pennsylvania that I cannot pronunciate, with his wife, Emily, their daughter, Maple, and their dog, Huckleberry. Welcome, Billy. I'm glad I'm at least pronouncing your name right, correct?
Yes, you are. The only thing you forgot was I turned 40 in April and still have lip ring, so I'm an expert at hanging on to things.
Okay, I'll add that for our next talk together. So awesome. Well, today I know you're talking all about the omega-3 to 6 ratios. What does that actually mean? A lot of people think you should just feed fish oils. There's the controversy around is omega-6, are those bad for pets, right? You're always hearing this is the bad omega. We shouldn't, it's inflammatory. So I know you're going to talk about that. And then I also really like that we're going to be talking about, does your pet even need that fish or omega-3 supplement? Because I know on my side, when I'm working with clients, a lot of times we end up putting a ton of supplements in the food bowl. And I always wonder, do we actually need all of that, right? When we start assessing what are the things that our pets truly need? And also too, if we don't need to be giving that, it can help you save some money, which is really helpful, especially during times right now. And then I know you're going to cover a little bit of the general fat to protein ratio and what do those numbers actually tell us, and then cover some other interesting fats that people may not even be aware of or familiar with. So Billy, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, and so I'm so glad you brought up a couple things there. For me and working in formulation with in the past and with Kelly over at Green Juju, I really defer to food. And I try to find food solutions, before going into supplementation. And supplements are great and can be great. One of the things I was talking about with a good example of that was in the intro when I was talking about Huckleberry and his yeast issue. The kefir, which is kind of more the food version of the yeast, was not an option. And so I started using a supplement in that case, which has worked very, very well for him. And so but we like to defer to that. And then the other part too is that every dog is going to be so much different than every other dog, to the point where I feel like in nutrition, just generally, it doesn't matter if you're talking about fats, doesn't matter if you're talking about, protein, doesn't matter if you're talking about antioxidants and plant levels and all these different things. Every animal is going to be so different to the sort of magnitude that humans are different. The best example I give of that fact is that both me and Kelly, the owner of Green Juju, are very health conscious in terms of what we put into our own bodies, what we put into our families' bodies, and our diets could not be more different in terms of how we go about eating. And so, yes, we can fit, dogs within a category of, this is foods that are more species appropriate, perhaps, or less species appropriate. But I really want people to understand that every dog is different, and that part of a big sort of thread through this little presentation here is figuring out your own dog. And that's, for me, that's the fun part. We get to figure out what works for our dog, and what doesn't work, and cats as well, because you have a cat. This is more geared towards dogs, but all these principles will also be relevant to, really, I mean, when you're talking about fats, they're all relevant to everyone. They're relevant to people watching this as well, in regard to that.
Yeah.
And so it's just a little bit easier with dogs and cats because they can't, like, go to Target and buy Oreos or something like that. So
unless we buy it for them, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to jump right into this just because. So I'm just going to go over sort of two concise things that I think are really interesting and relevant when it comes to just the overall diet and fat. So the first thing we're going to talk about, because I think there's a lot of confusion on this, and especially confusion when you're talking about food companies and what they rate their own foods in terms of the fat to protein percentage. So you might hear 1-to-1, you might hear all these different things, you might hear ketogenic in this way. And I think there's some confusion there. And so I really want to kind of like lay this out for people, because there's two elements to this. There's fats as in terms of ratio of the diet completely. And then there's also the fats that you intake, if that makes sense. So this first part is on how many fats are just in the diet in terms of how that works. And then you have to make sure that those fats are, healthy, obviously. So again, there would be some dogs and some cats that would need a lower fat diet. I don't think that ultimately has the most to do with pancreatitis. I think pancreatitis is more apt to happen when it's just constant carbohydrates and hitting the pancreas,
Yeah.
But there are some that will do better on a lower fat diet. That doesn't mean, but I'm going to talk about the general dog in this case. And so
like a healthy pet, just to kind of like without a health issue, correct?
Yeah. And this would be like almost any age range. You might want to increase the protein as they're getting older. But the cool thing is when you're fitting, 95% of dogs are going to fit within this range. So the first one is a 1-to-1. So ketogenic diets are kind of like a thing now in the pet world, and that's a good thing. But there's two types of 1-to-1. So 1-to-1 protein to fat ratio by calories is, in my view, the lowest end for a healthy dog. And so what that means is that, so there's two versions here, calories and weight. So by calories, so if you break down nutrition generally, there's 4 calories in a gram of protein and there's 9 calories in a gram of fat. And so a 1-to-1 fat to protein ratio by calories would be, for instance, roughly, let's say you had 10 grams of protein and 5 grams of fat. Then once you look at the overall diet, you are going to get the same amount of calories from fat and protein. And that's typically the lower end of what most dogs, people tend to kind of demonize fat just in general. I think that comes from the human food industry. And what we grow up on, my mom still definitely does some, I did get her to drink whole milk, but she definitely, still does some of the low fat, X, Y, and Z products. And so I think fat has really been demonized. But if you look at this chart here, which we're going to discuss in a second, there's really there's only 3 things, and they're all, and 2 of them, protein and fat, are the most relevant, in terms of doing that. In terms of what your dog is going to eat in that. And you'll see a lot of the formulations that are like, so this first one, you're looking at some more of the formulations, maybe in commercial dog food or your own homemade diet, that are around like 45 calories an ounce ish, maybe 50 calories an ounce. That's what that typically is going to range out at. So that's the low end. So the high end is going to be a 1-to-1 fat to protein ratio by weight. And so if you have a manufacturer who is talking about these different ratios, you want to clarify with them what that means exactly, because The 1-to-1 fat to protein ratio by weight is, as you could guess it, if you have 10 grams of protein, you have 10 grams of fat. So this is the higher end of what would almost be considered like a maintenance ketogenic diet. The ketogenic diet would probably be a little bit lower in protein, but in this case, you're getting double the amount of calories from fat as you are from protein. So this would be up in that 65, 70 calorie range for a diet. This is where that's going to be. So I would argue that it's more relevant to just call that a 2-to-1 ratio based on what the consumer is actually ready to. If I said to you a 1-to-1 ratio, I don't think you would be thinking to yourself, oh, double the fat, double the calories from fat as protein. And if you break it down, that's really what it is. And this is a really great, especially for, some animals with kidney issues, that aspect of it. Basically, if you look below this at the graphic here, your dog's diet is a pie chart. And so when you take one thing away, you have to add something else. You can't just have no calories in those cases. And so I think that both of these are highly relevant for exactly what this data shows down here. So this wolf diet is actually a meta-analysis of 50 different wolf diet studies that showed what a wolf's diet looks like when they select what they're eating. And so you'll notice it's very low in carbohydrates. Wolves do eat carbohydrates. The purpose of the study was to figure out what would be the best, typical diet for a dog. And so obviously you're going a little bit higher on the protein side of this, but I'm guessing that a lot of that has to do with the leanness of the meat, that they're consuming typically. Or, there's a lot of there's a wolf pack, or I don't know if it's a wolf pack or multiple wolf packs, but that live, for instance, in the Pacific Northwest that eat only fish. Basically, they live, on the water. And so it would really depend, but this was kind of a meta-analysis of that. And I think that fits right in that lower end. So, it just depends. Now, there are differences between a wolf and a dog. However, we can glean a ton about what your dog might need. The one on the right here is actually a dog selection study, which they took 5 differing breeds. I think it was all the way down from like Papillon to like Great Dane, a bunch of different breeds there, and they let them choose what they wanted to eat. And so you can see when they actually chose what they wanted to eat, you can see it's more fitting with that higher end. Now, again, that's not to say that, obviously they're averaging out what those dogs actually chose. And those dogs chose a little bit more carbohydrates as well. But this would be a great time to tell you that, by the way, those little slivers of carbohydrates is a great place to insert the Green Juju vegetable blends. Because the really cool thing is they're very low in carbohydrates, but high in, what wolves and apparently dogs need in terms of doing that. So what you want to figure out for your own dog is, where do they fit on this? You know your dog better than anyone. So you want to figure out, where does their body condition look the best? Where does, their energy level look the best, their skin and coat, how they react to the food, in terms of how they're going to do that. Let's not forget about their enjoyment of the food, that element as well. And it also really depends on, obviously, your dog's activity level as well. You're going to be higher in fat, because on a model like this, they're using fat for energy more. And so obviously, if you have a dog that, is has a lot more activity. Good example, I would say my dog is, he gets about 2 miles of walks a day, because he walks up to the co-working space with me. And that's pretty good for a French bulldog. But I keep him more down in that lower range, because I know his body type and how that works typically. I do still think it's funny that he's a 3rd generation raw fed French bulldog and still had a yeast issue. So genetics are powerful, but
I think too, one of the things also is, with looking at your dog, I love how you said, like, this is an individual thing. So, hopefully people can have a little bit of fun with this and not be stuck in like a box. I feel like pet parents have been stuck in a box and told this is what you have to do and follow. And this is giving you a little bit more liberty to play around with some of these ratios based on studies that are out there and what like dogs thrive on. And looking at like what their stool looks like too, if you're seeing softer stool, or they're more gassy and they're not tolerating that fat content, especially if you're coming from like a really high carb diet, this is like the transition phase, right? Don't just jump straight into a higher fat diet. You can transition over to something like this slowly, especially if your pet might be a little bit more sensitive too. So those are a couple things that I thought of that maybe people may have questions with also.
Yeah, the stool is a very good point, because that's a good indicator of sort of, I mean, obviously stool quality is going to differ based on the diet you are,
Yeah.
but I think you as the dog owner also understand what is working in that department as well, and I, in terms of like, in the past and that kind of stuff, testing products and developing products, that's definitely something. My dog is like just a constant guinea pig, so I think he lives a pretty good life, but this, what I love about this too, is that it's showing you, what we always preach, which is like use fat, protein, and carbohydrate ingredients for what they're good at. So you notice that the dogs and the wolves are picking these low amount of carbohydrates because we know that plants are great for fiber. We know that raw fed dogs need more, diverse plant diversity of plant foods in their diet for more diverse fiber types. We were both at HVMA last year when they were talking about that, and they're in that low range. And then you notice here, I think it's getting better in terms of the fat, in terms of how we view fat in the industry. But so now that we know what the ideal is in this range, I did want to put this up for laughter's sake. This is the range for the AFCO fed animal.
So for everyone here, Bill, you might have to, some people may not know what AFCO is. I hope they do, but if someone's new here and they don't truly know, and remember, like, we're going off balance, complete and balanced on the bag. And so maybe just explain a little bit about AFCO, because we both know and we laugh, but I think some people may not know what that is.
So this is first of all, so this is your meeting AFCO standards for a complete and balanced diet, for a species appropriate, complete and balanced diet. So AFCO is an organization that is a private organization who has no legal authority. What they do is they make rules and recommendations, and then states adopt those as laws, and that's where they become laws. And most states do use AFCO as their, and a lot of people don't know, when you're developing products, it's very difficult because they have to be either in the OP or they have to be accepted as generally, accepted as safe. And so it really limits what you can do or how you can use different ingredients. But that's a very good point. This goes to show you that when you when you look at a bag of food and it says complete and balanced, it's up to you to determine whether you believe that claim or not. Because I would argue that there's a lot more to complete and balance than meeting certain nutrient requirements. Because what is a requirement? A good example of that would be if I have a senior dog and I give I start giving Lewis fermented golden paste, and it's full of curcumin, and my dog can now go on walks longer and can jump on the bed again. I would argue that that's a necessary nutrient now for that dog to sustain a good life. And so none of that really comes into effect when you're just looking at this baseline of, I think it's 26 vitamins and minerals that, sustain life. No one's kind of looking at that. So I put this up because I thought it was really funny.
It is. And I hope people are noticing there's a lot more yellow here.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit, like a tiny little sliver more. So
that's where all the subsidized corn and wheat goes into that little nice category there.
Yeah, your cheaper ingredients, right? Usually. So too.
Exactly. And it's all about the consumer, because if you even go to, like, say, Target and look at food, it's different now. And it's because the consumers require it. So even, chicken will be the first ingredient versus where it used to be corn or something. Now, obviously, those foods are not something I would recommend generally. However, it is the consumers that made that happen. So, it's good for us to ask questions. And again, going back to this one, if you have questions on this, it's a good time to go to your manufacturer and say, hey, where are you with this? And then the next thing too, we're going to talk about, you can ask questions as well. And the manufacturer of the products that you use, or the diet, the food that you're using, should always be really, really open about, where everything comes from and why. So now that we know the general range of fat to protein that you're looking for, now we need to make sure all of your fats are going to be in a good ratio. So the thing we're going to talk about sort of at the end of this is that there's an endless amount of diversity in fats. And so we're going to focus on 2 of these because these are essential, meaning your dog or you have to eat them in order to produce them. It's the same reason why, when my wife was pregnant, she took 6 fermented cod liver oil pills a day, is because my daughter's brain was developing. And if you don't get enough DHA to develop that 10% of the brain, it's not going to be there. And so, that's the reason why there's an actual study that shows that kids whose mothers took cod liver oil while they were pregnant have higher IQs generally. And it's the actual physical makeup of the brain. So that's why we focus on the 3 to 6 ratio. But I do want to throw it out there that there's, raw milk has over 400 different fatty acids, right? And so there's many different fatty acids. But if you want to make sure your dog or cat is getting a healthy diet, you want to make sure they go more towards what they evolved to eat. And one of the things you mentioned at the beginning, which I think is interesting, is people do talk about omega-6s being bad. Omega-6s are not bad. They're actually necessary. They're as necessary as omega-3s. We just live in a country and society where we eat way too many of them. Inflammation is a necessary part of the body. If you get a cut on your skin, it inflames. That's part of the healing process. And then that's, omega-6s, and then the omega-3s are going to, eventually bring that inflammation down. And so it's not necessarily that either one is bad. It's just that we do way too much of one that happens to be inflammatory typically. So here's another spoiler. I'm not going to give you an answer about what is the best ratio, because again, it goes down to your specific dog or cat. But I'm going to give you a ratio here. And I'm going to tell you sort of what that's based on. And then you can kind of figure that out. And then we'll talk about maybe sort of what dogs would benefit from a lower ratio, that sort of thing. So you're pretty much always going to have a higher amount of omega-6. So that's the way that nature kind of evolved. So if you look at prey animals, when they do this sort of testing on this, they're going to be about a 1 part omega-3 to 5 parts omega-6. But again, even that, data, I think that gives us a pretty good idea, but that data can be skewed as well, because if you take a prey animal in, say, Iowa, if you take a deer in Iowa, I guarantee they're feasting on a lot of that GMO corn that's, all over. So it just really depends. But and I would say the same thing, where I'm getting the 1 to 1 to 1 to 8 comes from dog information. It comes from human information, different mammal information. I would say 1 to 8 is going to be on the high, still healthy range to be able to do that. And it also comes from the averages that you see in correctly raised animals. So like a good example, beef is a grass-fed cow is going to be anywhere from 1 to 2 to 1 to 4 in terms of its omega-3 to 6 ratio, which is really healthy, right? Yeah. Same thing would be true for bison. But a pig, on the other hand, that is pastured, is, say, eating, organic feed, is going to be closer to that 1 to 8 range, maybe 1 to 7, I think would be a closer range. And if you notice on the bottom there, which we'll talk about, eggs that are raised on pasture that aren't necessarily getting a lot of supplemented omega-3 are going to be in that 1 to 7 range. So you you typically, and the cool thing is we're gonna figure out at the end of this how to do this really easily, and you don't have to be a nerd like me that has like a spreadsheet of everything his dog eats and then has the amounts of all these things. You can do that. It's actually really fun, in my opinion. That's
I have a
actually
few
my
clients that love doing that. So, I
the,
think it's good, good to say that, because I think there are a lot of nerds here, right? I don't know if you're a nerd, raise your hand.
well, and the funny thing is, outside of like
There people
my
are raising their hands right now, just FYI.
the outside of my job, that's my hobby, is doing this with my own dog. So like it, for me, that's fun part. I was actually, one time I was gone on a business trip, and Emily was feeding Huckleberry, and she's like, well, how much do I do with this? And I'm like, oh, no, that's the fun part, you get to figure that out. And she's like, that's
She's
not
like,
fun.
no. Just tell me.
Just tell me exactly what to do. So again, I think that in a lot of times, if you're dealing with a senior animal or an animal with chronic inflammation, which is really like most disease conditions, the lower end of this, a 1 to 5 and lower, is probably going to be really good. But if you have a healthy dog and you want to rotate between different proteins, let's say you're feeding a dog and you want to do pork this time, or you want to do beef, or however you want to do that, all of those are, as long as you raise them correctly, are going to be within that correct ratio. And again, do whatever works for your dog. I wouldn't, you don't have to stress about this. You just have to source correctly. So this is another thing to ask your manufacturer for if you're doing this at home, you probably, if you're, formulating diets at home, you probably can get a pretty good idea of where you stand, how much omega-3 and how much omega-6 is in the food itself. But if you're using a commercial raw diet, which I love, the idea of using a commercial raw diet and then adding things into that or changing that up, which we'll kind of talk about at the end of the slide here. But find out what the ratio is. And maybe they can even give you not only the ratio itself, but also the raw numbers there. So, and if you're calculating that out, you just divide the omega-6s by the omega-3s, and then you'll get your, 1 to 3, 1 to 4. Typically being able to do that. And if your company doesn't know that information, then that's a problem, right? Yeah. In terms of that. Yeah. But most companies are using fish oil and things like that to be able to do this, to be able to kind of like do that ratio differently. But this is another great way to figure out if in fact your food is being sourced correctly, because if there is no fish oil or anything in the food and it's beef food, and you reach out to the manufacturer and it's 1 to 17, then that's a grain-fed cow that's probably in a feedlot, or even higher, right? I think the AFCO recommendation on this is like 1 to 32 or something. Gosh. Or 1 to 30. So obviously,
and then with your, like, what was it, 69% carbohydrates. So we're doing really
exactly
good, right?
So you can only imagine like the constant stress we're putting on dogs and cats when we feed a diet that is rich in every unhealthy fat ratio and carbohydrates. It's crazy.
That is why we have, you did an amazing talk with Dr. Judy Morgan the other day. And this is why we see so much cancer. We see chronic inflammation. We see all these health conditions and stubborn health conditions, because I think, pet parents and a lot of vets, they don't understand this concept where food is truly medicine, but we also have to ask those questions and ask the companies too, where they're sourcing, so we can better understand how we can support our pets. Because like you said, food is medicine. Like, we don't need necessarily all these supplements if we're doing this part right.
Exactly. And so that's actually a great intro to the next point, which is adjust if needed based on the amounts and not the recommended dose. So basically, one of the reasons you might want to reach out and get the actual numbers for this is because a good example would be if you are feeding a grass-fed beef food, let's say the ratio is 1 to 4, you don't really need a supplement there.
Yeah.
You could use one to reduce the ratio. Let's say you're dealing with an animal that is prone to pancreatitis, or you're dealing with an animal that, as a senior animal that has joint stiffness, you could use it. but none of that would be based on the recommended dose on the packaging. So the recommended dose on the packaging of a omega-3 supplement or a fish oil supplement is sort of weirdly irrelevant, because it would depend on what your animal is already, sort of the diet they're already on. A good example of that, one of them that I really like is the one from Adored Beast,
The algae, the
yeah,
sea safe algae.
yeah, because essentially it says not only does it give you a dose like this many, but it says the amount of omega-3 on it, which I think is important, because then you could use that to adjust based on the amounts you're doing. So a good example of this is I typically use for huckleberry a fermented cod liver oil / concentrated butter oil supplement. It's in a gel cap. It's not very much. It's like a total of like, I think 150 omega-3s per day, but I'm more using that to kind of top off as vitamin D, to top off a small amount of vitamin E and vitamin A. But it's great. He gets that extra, little dose of, but that I would argue is more food-based, because it's just, raw cod liver oil. But it's sort of that same thing. So for those of you that are going to the lengths to actually get, say, grass-fed, 100% grass-fed beef, or pigs that are pastured, and paying that extra money, you might not need to pay the extra money for that recommended, or for that omega-3 supplement. I'm not trying to discourage people from using those, because I think they can be a really good tool. Again, if you really want to get down to, it's pretty difficult. I mean, I don't know if there's really a reason you need to like go all the way down to a 1-to-1. I mean, maybe that would be, I think that's a healthy ratio, but I don't really think, based on my experience, that that would be so much different than, say, a 1-to-2 or a 1-to-3 or something like that. But like I said, if you have an animal that has severe joint issues, a 1-to-2 would be good. Great time to use a supplement. If you have, a young huckleberry French bulldog, I don't think you would need to take and add. And the interesting thing about that is, a lot of especially in the fish oil side of the supplement spectrum, what you're getting there is sort of like, the recommended dose for a dog huckleberry size is 1,000 milligrams of omega-3, or 1,200, or whatever it might be. And you definitely don't need that much if you're feeding, a ratio-based diet, because I would argue it's more about the ratio than it is about the actual amount. And you can get this stuff from food. I'm a big believer in building diets through food, and then seeing if you sort of need to top this off. So that goes on to that. You may not need the omega-3 supplement.
I think that's also a good point too, is that, going back to the supplements, I mean, the supplement industry is highly unregulated also. So if we can find a good food source and that we trust and like, and we can build a healthy diet using grass-fed animals that are going to bring that ratio down, I mean, then you don't even have to worry, did this company get bought out? Is that like fish oil rancid, like in those capsules, like all the stuff that can come with a worry around supplementation, and also the costs too. So I think that's a great point to bring up, is, if you're looking at your pet and trying to figure out what's the best way forward, optimize the diet first. I talked to someone earlier today, and it was like, they're having some health issues, and they're like, what supplement do we use? And I was like, well, the diet needs to be fixed first. Like that's 100% where we need to go. So I think that's really important also, is, if we can minimize supplements, we minimize the cost of care for pets. And I also think the sourcing too, if we can find a good source, you're supporting like local farmers that are doing things right. Like supporting these grass-fed animals is huge. If we can support more people doing it that way, it's 100% more sustainable for the environment too. And like, I mean, that's a different conversation, but it's just one of those things that all plays a part when we start looking at things differently.
Yeah, it's better for those animals. And
100%.
you can think about, in the case of using whole fish, small fish, that kind of thing, using these different methods when it comes to sort of building out the diet. And the greatest thing about all this is, you know, you can look at all these things, you can analyze all this, your dog's diet, you can do all these things, but you don't have to do that, because as long as you're feeding correctly raised animals, you don't need to think about the ratio, because they're all going to be in a healthy ratio. So it doesn't matter if it's an egg is 1-7 and your beef is 1-2, and as long as everything you're doing is in that 1-1 to 1-8 ratio, or 1-1 to 1-5, whatever you find to be the best thing you want to do, you're going to be in that healthy ratio, and you don't really have to worry about tallying all that up. And so it just goes back to food. It just goes back to, if I feed a cow the way it's meant to be fed, then it's going to be in the healthy ratio. If I feed, a duck that is actually free ranging and out in the sun and doing those things, it's going to be within that healthy ratio, or a rabbit or whatever it might be, to be able to do that. So the good news is, for those people watching, as long as your base of your diet is you're doing that, then you don't really have to worry about those things. A good example of that, raw goat's milk, like this beautiful raw goat's milk here from a little company called Green Juju, which is the best goat's milk in the world, is a 1-to-1 ratio. So you are going to get about 28 milligrams of omega-3 per ounce. Now, you may be saying to yourself, that's not really that much, but, and I'm going to just show you that I have to use my calculator here. So, but in terms of, if you're building the diet and say you're going to do 4 ounces of that a day, that's 112 milligrams of omega-3. That's not an insignificant amount in terms of doing that. And then you add that to whatever you're getting from the food and whatever you're getting from maybe the egg we'll talk about in a second. And now you have a completely food-based omega-3 profile. And again, you don't really have to worry about supplementation in that way. And one of the other things we're going to talk about, which is, just an example of how you can't put all your eggs in one basket, is the C15 new fat, which, is found mostly in whole fat milk. But so goat's milk raw goat's milk is a really good way to do that. And then eggs are like one of my favorite foods, just generally. You're using pasture raised eggs or pasture raised yolks, that's going to be a 1-to-7 ratio. And eggs are actually if you're using pastured eggs, and this total can go up. I would say this is just the average of several studies that I've seen, but that's 135 milligrams of omega-3 per egg, and it's mostly DHA, which is definitely the more sort of efficient between DHA and EPA. You can find eggs that are higher than this, depending on the chicken's diet. They'll kind of manipulate that by feeding flax and some other things to produce more omega-3s. But as long as your chicken's out, eating grass and bugs and living the life it should, you're going to get 135, milligrams. And I will tell you right now, when I feed Huckleberry at home, I commonly build his diet. He's a 25 pounds. I build 4 egg yolks into his diet daily. That's 540 milligrams at least of omega-3, mostly DHA. Now that's like supplemental levels right there, but I'm building that into his fat profile. I'm building that into, all of his vitamin profile in regards to, all those fat soluble vitamins. I mean, eggs are like milk. They're like multivitamin, right? They have virtually everything that your dog or cat needs, or that you need in regard to that. And so these are ways to sort of build that out without actually. So I think the point here is to build out the diet first, and then look to see if you need supplementation beyond that.
Yep. No, I agree with that.
And I'm very proud of my little egg graphic on here that I put. I'm not
Next
the most
to the best goat's milk in the world.
Absolutely. And so it's a good time to point out that our milk is so good that all of it is certified for human consumption in the state of Pennsylvania. I live in a state where I actually have a milkman who comes to my door every Thursday and delivers my raw milk, to my house. And you can buy it at the grocery store. And so we go the extra mile to make sure this is the best goat's milk from happy mostly Lancaster County goats there. So
Not Lancaster.
not Lancaster. They would be like, get out of my county immediately. So
I think there's a question. Why not the
yeah.
egg whites?
Oh, you could do the egg white too. This just doesn't have anything to do with the fat of it. So all of the fat is going to be in the yolk and virtually all the vitamins as well. But an egg in itself, so the protein that you get from there is 2.7 grams of protein in an egg yolk and 4.5 grams of fat. And then I believe in an egg, there's 6 and 5. So you can see there's very little fat in the actual yolk, the actual white itself. But the cool thing about egg yolks or eggs as a whole, when you combine those two things, it is the most bioavailable protein on the planet. So there's a scale by which they measure protein, and eggs are 100 on that scale. They're the scale itself, and every other food in existence is below that scale. I think raw whey protein, which could be found in is obviously found in raw milk, is number 2, and then you have your meats and all that kind of thing. And then it goes down to like, you get to the corn would be like a 30 or something, you know, it's way down on the list. So both are really good. I just use it because I'm just building a specific profile, and I'm not really with the food that I use. I'm not really looking to add a lot more protein. I'm really looking to add more fat in that way. So both are great.
Awesome.
So one of the things I sort of wanted to talk about. So I found this fat because of a supplement, but what I like to do is look for it in food first. A good example of that was I once saw I hope I say this right. I once saw a supplement for something called alkyl glycerols, which are like, it's a cancer treatment in Europe. It's a certain type of fat, and they were harvesting it, I think, from some part of the shark, some shark. And that's where they were finding it. And this was many, many years ago. This was probably like 2014 that I was looking into this. And then I was looking at the chemical makeup of milk, and I was like, of course, there it is. Because everything is in raw milk. And so the supplement company sort of sent me down this rabbit hole, but they did their due diligence in putting out some peer-reviewed studies. But the interesting thing about this nutrient was they were basically saying, like, they were kind of going the vegan route and kind of saying like, it's in milk, but you don't want to drink milk. So this is why we're going to take it out of this. But just it's actually a saturated fat, which, you know, again, people really demonize saturated fats, but saturated fats you actually need more of any other fat and to make you healthy. And it's really what, you know, it's, you know, I know for myself personally, my favorite snack is popcorn with raw butter on it. And so you get plenty of all of those saturated fats. But with this C15, so it's actually, they're looking at it now as an essential fatty acid, just like omega-6 and 3. But the interesting thing is they found, and I'm referencing something here. It's weird because normally I just like talk and remember, but I am referencing this because, you know, so with this specific fat, when they looked at the sort of clinically relevant benefits, it had 26 more than omega-3s. It sort of functions in the same way as omega-3s, but it was more relevant to, you know, more cell types. In fact, it was more relevant to 2.5 more cell types than omega-3s. And so that is 10 out of the 12 cell types as opposed to 4 out of the 12. So omega-3 only really worked in repairing 4 out of the 12, where this was 10 out of the 12.
Wow.
So that goes to show you that we could talk all day about your animal is going to get omega-6s and 3s based on what everything has omega-6s and 3s. If you eat a banana, it has an omega-3 to 6 ratio, right? But we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket, because this is a fat that, as far as I know in my own research, because that's where you have to, you know, if you find an interesting concept, be it in supplementation or wherever you go, you kind of have to like look at that. And luckily I have access to testing food products. So, you know, you can test certain things, and maybe this data is really only relevant to me and a small group of people who actually, get paid to do this part of this thing. But it was no surprise to me that this fatty acid was in whole milk, and that's the most abundant food source of this. I believe it's so the supplemental dose for an adult human was like 100 milligrams, and I believe there was like 10 to 20 milligrams in an ounce of milk, which I would argue is going to be the better version of it. But again, now let's say you have a small dog and you're feeding 4 ounces of goat milk a day, you're looking at 40 milligrams, which doesn't seem that much, but it really is. That's almost half the dose for an adult human, say. And I found even more in organ meats, specifically for ruminants, versus testing organ meat, high organ content in pigs, for example. For whatever reason, I didn't find them there. But if you're talking about, our bison green or beef red treats, and you're talking about a lot of heart and liver there, you're talking about a lot more of this. And so these were the two food sources that I found. And so just another reason to do more organ meats in the diet. And our treats are a great way to do that, because I find that most companies are still going on this 80-10-10, only 5%, let's say liver, kidney, spleen, sort of secreting organs, in which I would say we can go much higher than that to get a better result. And so,
do you worry? So because I can see where people will be asking questions maybe later. Do you get worried about like your vitamin A content or things like that? I know there's a big range compared to, if we're looking at AFCO, right?
yeah.
But do you get worried about putting things out of range when you are increasing your organ meat content significantly?
I don't, because, having formulated with large amounts of organs over the years, I didn't see any negative detriment, as long as everything is sourced correctly, to things that people worry about, like copper. I think that's a big one right now. I didn't see, and you can look at the amount in grass-fed versus, and the other part too is that animals that are raised in feedlots are going to be supplemented with things, and they're going to retain more of those things. But the other part too is that when you look at vitamin, the three big ones are vitamin A, vitamin D, and then vitamin K2, which is, where vitamin K2 is the one that is the lesser known of those three things. You look at them together and where they're found in nature, and you find that those things help to metabolize each other. So as long as they're coming from actual food, I'm never worried about that. I mean, you look at certain diets. I mean, salmon is an amazing source of vitamin D. Sardines are an amazing source of vitamin D, and there's dogs that are on diets where that is the main source of protein, and you're still not seeing that. And so I think the ceiling lifts when they're actually from food. Yes. So, I think if your food company is doing 5% liver, say, that an animal can have way more than that and get better results. But again, it would depend on the animal, right? But that's just what I've seen.
I could see one of the other things too, if you're using a company that's also using synthetic vitamins and minerals, and then they have a combination of things, would that also create some concern that?
Yes, 100%.
Okay.
So a lot of times people, so the one of the problems with AFCO is that essentially there's two profiles for cats, one for wet food. I think that's such a weird term, but wet food, and it's food that's wet. And and I like my food
super
wet.
Technical.
It's very weird. So things that go on inside my brain. So and then dry food, but in dogs there's only a dry food one, so we have to fit all of the other categories into that. And so the problem is that a lot of people will just put a vitamin pack in there, but there is where you can have trouble, because if you're looking at, say, large food company, that shall not be mentioned, getting recalled for vitamin D because they had too much vitamin D, that comes from a supplement, too much of a supplement. That's not from your dog is eating liver, our bison liver trainers, which is 100% grass-fed bison, which is going to have normal natural levels of vitamin D and vitamin A that complement each other for that. And so in 12 years of doing this, I've never seen an animal with a higher formulation that I've been involved with of organs that's had a negative result from it. The thing people often ask me is it too rich? But I don't know what rich means in terms of it's some people say that means
is like diarrhea. Like creating diarrhea, I think is what, like, is it going to be too, it's like they're referring to like, will this cause diarrhea?
Oh, well, I mean,
Like
if you're worried about that, I would just transition on to whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't necessarily do that. So the C15 fatty acid, I would encourage anyone watching this to maybe, I'm in the process of researching it. But it's something to think about, and another great reason to feed, raw goat's milk, another great reason to add more organs into the diet. And it's just something to think about sort of moving forward. So coconut oil is another one that, half the people love it. And some of the people, when they reference lauric acid, don't like it for some reason. But again, this is another great way. This is not a replacement for omega-3. I think people get that question a lot. Well, can I just use coconut oil? This is going to do something totally different. So it's high in, and there's people that know a lot more about this than me. I will say that right off the onset of this, but it's mostly useful for those, those medium chain fatty acids, like caprylic acid, capric acid, lauric acid. And so this is another great one to throw in. You can see I put two products here on the right-hand side of the screen there, both of which have coconut oil in them. So all of our blends have a smaller amount of coconut oil, and it's a great way to regulate blood sugar. It's a great way to add, those extra medium chain fatty acids for, it's well studied for its ability, for its cognitive effects in terms of animals that have cognitive decline, or its anti-cancer effects. And then also, obviously, in our Lewis fermented golden paste, not only are you getting the effects of the antioxidant, anti-inflammatory effect of the, the pre-processed fermented turmeric, and reducing that down curcumin, but also that coconut oil as well. So now, we know about the great cognitive effects of this. Now, if you have a senior and all of a sudden you have the senior that's having all these issues, and you take their diet and you put them on a natural diet and you get their omega-3 to 6 ratio right, so they're not inflamed, and then you start to add food products that have this coconut oil in it, now you're getting this really wonderful mix of all these healthy fats and kind of putting that all together. And I will also add too that goat milk, I think it's 54% of the saturated fat in goat's milk is medium chain fatty acids as well. And I do want to address very quickly the elephant in the room, lauric acid, which is another fatty acid type, which for some reason, I think there was a study that showed something about, if I'm remembering correctly, the digestive lining. But lauric acid is really an interesting thing, because one of the things that people don't normally put together when you hear, for instance, goat milk is made for baby goats and cow milk is made for baby cows, and it's specific to that animal. That couldn't be further from the truth, because all milks are made of exactly the same thing, just in different amounts, which is kind of a drum I like to beat, because it's just such a common misconception that somehow cow's milk is inflammatory towards human because it's made for cows. Well, it's made of the same stuff that breast milk is made of. So how would that ever be the case? And that dog milk is made of, and the cat milk is made of. A good example of that would be, my daughter was on raw milk formula from like 2 weeks old, and we added more whey to it because human breast milk has more whey than cow's milk. And so we were trying to approximate that to get that closer, which was a really fun conversation to have with my pediatrician. They were really psyched about me making my own formula, I can tell you.
I think that was sarcasm for anyone who didn't pick up on that.
They wrote a note in our file that said, "Dad read a nutrition book and makes his own formula."
Excellent. That's great.
So I was like, well, I told her, well, she did say, she was like, I can't recommend it, but she looks amazing. And I was like, well, there you go. I'll take that. And I did tell her the formula recipe was from a PhD in fats. By the way, if you really want to know some really cool things about fats, there's a book called Know Your Fats by Mary Innig. It's a short book. It's an easy read, and she is just a brilliant writer and thinker on fat. She's no longer alive, but she was a brilliant thinker on fats in general, and she'll probably change your views on butter and all those things as well if you read the book.
Mary Ann, what was her name again?
Mary Innig, Enig.
Perfect. Okay.
I was giving a live once, and somebody was like, that was my babysitter. And I was like, oh, that's so cool.
Wow.
I wish that was my babysitter. They said they called her the crazy butter lady. But here she has a PhD in fats. So kids are...
it's great. I'm going to send that book to my mother. She needs some updated information about fats and things. So.
Yeah, exactly. But I say that because all mammal milks have lauric acid in them in significant amounts. And so why would, biology, works, and evolution works by whittling down over time the things that animal needs to sustain them completely. And lauric acid is a big part of that. So if lauric acid is essentially bad for dogs and cats, then why is it in every mammal's milk? And I feel bad for all those babies all around the all around the earth that are, drinking milk. So there's so many different, what I love about nutrition is there's always different avenues to look up and learn new things. And we discover new things all the time. So I would encourage anyone watching this to just to look at all of those things. I know that for me, I think about nutrition about 86% of my day, it doesn't matter if I'm working, not working. I've been known to we're just randomly watching a show and I'll stop it and be like, so what do you think about this? And then Emily's like, stop. What I think about that is, please stop. So in conclusion, the cool thing is, don't let anyone give you the exact answer to what fat ratio is going to work best for your dog. You know your dog better than anyone. And so figure that out. Use a great holistic vet to help you figure that out if that's the route you want to go, and find the right omega ratio that works best for your dog. And don't stress out too much. We went into the nitty gritty of this, but you don't have to do that. Just feed animals that are raised correctly, and you'll find that ratio. Find companies like, I don't know, Green Juju, that use animals that are raised correctly. And then fat diversity really is the key. So I love when we test things and we get test data back. It's so interesting to me to look at all of these different, but nature is, always going to be the best scenario in terms of what we revert back to. It's sort of like, you can't compare a fiber supplement to just greens and getting all these different fiber types. So we always go back to nature. So that's the end of it. That's how awkwardly I end these things. So
no, I love it. No, it's great.
I'll go to the stop share for questions. Does that work?
Sounds good. Yeah,
okay.
You'll have to stop sharing your screen.
Yeah, there we go.
Perfect. Awesome. So if anyone here has any questions, I know there was a question towards the beginning from Debbie. My dog has CKD, and one of my recipes for her includes hemp seed oil in addition to omega-3. What is the purpose of the hemp? Seems to be high in omega-6. So you kind of touched on that a little bit, but do you want to talk further about that?
Hemp is actually is one of the better nuts. So all nuts and seeds are typically going to be high in omega-6s. Like peanut butter is really high in omega-6. I love peanut butter. If I'm going to want to eat something sweet, like a peanut butter cup is probably always number one on my list for that sort of thing. but peanut butter is going to be high in omega-6s. I believe hemp is a 3-to-1 omega-3 to 6 ratio. So it's actually good. It's actually on the lower end, but it's also not a significant source. You wouldn't want to do most of your omega-3 through that. And the reason why is because it's in ALA form, which your dog is not very good at converting. ALA does other things. There's actually a lot of ALA in milk, for example, as you could guess. There's also obviously EPA and DHA, but typically your dog is going to be able to use EPA and DHA way better, as are you as a human, but especially your dog or cat. And so you can use that in conjunction, but I would go with an animal source typically, unless you're talking about, the algae source of it. When you talk about, you'll actually get the EPA and DHA versus ALA, which is not going to be as usable. It'd be
great.
It'd be sort of akin to using carrots for your vitamin A content.
Yeah, I like that analogy. Yeah, that's good. That's helpful. Does anyone else have any questions? Facebook, I see you guys on there. Anyone else that's in Zoom with us? You can drop them in the chat or put a comment in if there's anything that you need cleared from your mind. You have the master of nutrition here, Billy. So
Hopefully that just means I explained it well if there's no questions, but
you've blown them away. They're like calculating ratios right now at home. So, I think that's what's happening right now. Oh, and actually here's a question, C15 and goat's milk.
Yes, actually, let me just, I can tell you exactly how much. Give me 1 second. I can pull it up for myself on my computer. Yes, I do. Actually, I do have that. And again, that totally makes, while I look this up, that totally makes sense in terms of its, the fact that obviously milk has basically everything. So milk has, is it gone now? Did I lose this thing? I think, yeah, it's not on the sheet, but I believe it's 15 milligrams per ounce. Okay. So again, let's say we look at,
you mentioned cows. I think you mentioned cow's milk was 20 milligrams per ounce.
Yeah, so I would be about 15 to 20, and that would just depend on the other thing that about milk is, let's not get stuck on specific for any nutrient when it comes from a whole food. We cannot give specific amounts. It's always just a basic thing. So the nutrients in our goat's milk that day, the fat amount, the protein amount, is based on the season that goat was milked in, what it ate, was it outside and getting more vitamin D into its milk. All of these different things are going to be sort of dependent on that. So let's say it's a range of 15 to 20. You're looking at 75 to 80 milligrams if you're doing that 4 ounces of milk, which is a pretty normal amount for, I would say, a dog that's my dog size, Huckleberry size. And again, we don't know 100%, like, because we're basing this off of, like, say what a human supplement is. But then again, you also have to look at the food variety of it, because it's not always about the amount. When it's, nutrients in milk are suspended in moisture and they're meant to be delivered into the system. So I would wager to guess that that taking the supplement is a far different thing than, say, doing that. And that's why when you look at milk, it doesn't blow you away in terms of the amount of everything. It just has everything. And that's the same reason why milk doesn't meet a dog just drinking milk does not meet any AFCO compliance, any NRC compliance. I have seen dogs live off of raw milk and water for more than 5 years and completely thrive. And I guarantee you're not going to meet any of those ratios. So that just goes to show you, like, nature tends to be different in that way. And so
I think that's great. I think it leads into Debbie's question. So when you say feed the ratio that works best for your dog, what would you be looking for? How do you know? So I know that's a bigger question.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. Well, I think anytime you're feeding the like healthy version of these foods, say, your grass-fed beef, you're going to typically range somewhere between, just naturally, without supplementation, anywhere from like 1 to 2 to 1 to 5 or 6 probably. And I don't know if you're going to, like, see a noticeable difference. Like, do I do a 1 to 3? Do I do a 1 to 4? I don't know if you'll really see a noticeable difference there, but I think there would be a noticeable difference between like a 1 to 2. And that would be more like that's where you'd want to do the supplementation. And that's where you'd be talking about like health issues or skin issues, you know, hotspot issues, just dry skin, you know, that kind of issue. That's where you'd see a big change in that. But if you had and you'd probably notice a big difference between, say, on the higher end of that, like a 1 to 7 or 1 to 8, down to like a 1 to 2. But I would say it would be the main difference between that would be health issues versus not having health issues, even within that healthy range, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But with a young dog, I would recommend, you know, or a dog that has no health issues, I would recommend I wouldn't exclude the pork food just because it's going to be 1 to 7, say. I think the best thing to do for dogs generally is to rotate between, you know, as many food items as possible to be able to sort of get different ratios. And then you might notice like, oh, I noticed, you know, my dog has better skin when I randomly incorporate fish a few days a week or something like that. That would be just lowering that ratio. Like if you add your like, you know, your tin of sardines and water that you get from the grocery store, and you do that a couple times a week, that's going to be like 1,800 milligrams of omega 3 and virtually no omega 6s. So that's going to lower that level drastically. And you might notice like, oh, I noticed my dog's skin is better. So that would just be a general lower ratio versus like, there's no way you could be like, you could chart out like on a 1 to 3, my dog looks like this, on a 1 to 4, you know. So hopefully that kind of answers the question.
I think that makes sense. I think too, like this is a common thing you hear all the time, I'm sure too, is, you know, I changed my dog from like a processed food diet. So obviously too high carbs, super high omega-3/6 ratio, inflammatory ratio, and they switched to a fresh food diet and they look like a completely new dog. So, I mean, there's numerous things that are going on there, but this would definitely play a part, especially if you're using fresh food and grass fed and all of that. So that's a key thing there. I'll take a few. Are you good on time, Billy, for a couple more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So there's a couple questions that came through on the Q&A. So Ashley, is it possible to give too much omega-3 oil supplement? My dog has metastatic transitional cell cancer and trying to give a lot of omega-3 for inflammation.
There's not a lot of data on. It's interesting because you would think if you can overdo omega 6s that you can overdo omega 3s.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of data on that. And I think that's just because like naturally the way that we and dogs eat, you know, in the last 100 years, you know, 200 years or whatever, you know, in people, it's like we're getting this stuff because like grains, and the main thing is seed oils is where you're getting all these omega 6s, and it's in everything. I will tell you when Emily was pre-pregnancy and pregnant, she did a specific diet where you couldn't eat any seed oils, and we basically couldn't go to a restaurant for like 2 years unless she could always get the most expensive thing on the menu. So she could get like lobster and butter or steak. So, you know, when we go out to lunch, it'd be like, oh, Emily will take the $36 steak. So that's good. But but I guess like if I'm just like theorizing about it, you know, omega 3s and 6s are involved in the healing, as I mentioned, the healing process where like it gets your body gets inflamed to start the healing process, right? And then the inflammation's reduced. So maybe if you had like no omega 6s and all omega 3s, that inflammation process couldn't happen or would be hard to happen. But I don't think there's any data. If she's doing the supplementation, it seems to be working out really well. I would continue to do that, but otherwise you could just look at the diet you're doing and sort of go through the steps we talked about and ask your manufacturer what the ratio is. But as long as I said before, as long as the diet doesn't contain a bunch of grains or seed oils or something like that. And that's the other thing too, is even now, a lot of companies are starting to sneak in, even on the fresh food side, your canola oils and your sunflower oils and things like that. Sunflower oil can be great as a source of vitamin E in very small amounts, but if it's the main fat, again, you're going to be going on that high, you know, omega 6 train. So definitely look into that. But the short answer is there's not enough data, but
Yeah.
I don't think so.
I think one of the things too, if you're giving a ton of omega-3s, you do have to be a little bit careful with like thinning the blood, I would
Mm,
say also. So that's just something I think, like anything, I think we can overdo things, right? Like, if you look at, obviously, like Billy just said, we don't necessarily have a lot of data to showcase what is exactly that amount, but I'd be careful just knowing from, recommending supplementation, you want to just be careful about that.
mhm.
This isn't something where we just give all the omega-3s, especially for cancer, for one, making sure that diet is, solidified and appropriate to not feed cancer cells. And then I think it's also looking at other anti-cancer supplements, herbs, partnering with a integrative or holistic veterinarian, because there's a lot of different things you can do to help slow that cancer down and help it regress. It is a very common cancer, and toxins can play a part. There's studies that showcase that can increase the risk. I know that's completely different, but it's just one of those things we need to look at the other things too, not just omega-3s. This is an important piece to the puzzle. But there's other factors that I would be going down those routes rather than like pumping them full of omega-3 supplementation.
That's a great point. It's so many different, it's genetics, it's
There's a
environment,
lot of
it's
different, like,
crazy.
it's all sorts of things. Like, what's the stress levels? What's the environmental toxin load? How well is this pet detoxing? Are they getting, there's so many, like, are they getting flea and tick products? Like, what's the microbiome doing, right? There's all these other factors we have to look at. And I talk a lot about those. So I think omega-3s are an important piece, but they're not, I don't want to say they're not the biggest piece. I think food is the
Mhm.
biggest piece, but then we also have to look at the other factors that we can use to help the body, because there's a major immune dysregulation that's going on that leads to that cancer. So,
Yeah, a great example I think of that is my dog Lua, who died 2 Augusts ago, who was my dog, my dog of all dogs. And to this day, I still get,
yeah.
when I talk about her, but she was born in a puppy mill and had terrible, terrible genetics. And she lived to be 15. Now, would I have loved her to live to be 30? Absolutely. Was that going to probably be in the cards for her, given she's probably the 100th generation of malnourished dog that, came from her?
Mm.
No, I think I did the best I could. And I think I think I gave her the best life she could have had, from a nutritional standpoint and from avoiding those things.
Yeah.
So it's good to just be realistic when it comes to everyone is against it genetically. It doesn't matter if it's purebred, mixed breed. You're not coming from, I think it takes like, what is it, 7 generations to get rid of
Yeah.
bad genetics. And so everyone is, in the same boat. And so I think it's important that people realize, like, oh, we're all doing the best we can
Yeah.
with all these factors. Oh, another good example of that. I bought a house. It's the end of a row home here in Lancaster, and it was built in 1900. And I have a very tiny backyard, and Huckleberry goes out there to go to the bathroom. I have no idea what was sprayed back there throughout. Can you imagine in the 1960s and 50s what was sprayed in my backyard?
What's buried back there?
Exactly. So I have no idea. In fact, uh, my neighbor was like, oh, because I was talking about, I am like not the most like I build stuff guy in the world. I wish I was. I really respect people that can do that. But so I went and got some of my lawn. I got one of those mowers that like you push, it doesn't have any power to it. It's the circle thing, that's how small my yard is. It's like an Amish mower. But I needed to get an edger that was battery powered. And my neighbor was like, oh, the people who lived here for like 42 years before you, they had a better system for that. He would just spray like weed killer on the outside. And I was like, oh, why did you tell
God.
me that? So
Oh,
these are all things that we deal with, right?
yeah.
Lua lived in LA for 5 years. I mean, LA is insanely dirty when it comes to, the pollution. So I think this is life circumstances are different for all of us, but we all just need to keep in mind that
Yep. I mean, I was there. Finn developed a brain tumor,
Mhm.
and there's like lots of spray. My neighbors, I mean, there's yellow flags everywhere.
Yes.
Even it's like winter and there's like yellow flags, like from people spraying, herbicides on their lawn. And it's just, it's one of those things, like, I didn't realize at that time, and I think too, it's an important reminder, like, everyone here is on a different part of their journey, with what we're talking about and where we're at and the things that we want to implement with our pets. And I think it's important to give yourselves like the grace, like that you are learning, you are here learning, you're taking the time to learn. And I appreciate that. And I love that about, the pet parents in our community and the ones coming in that just don't know yet, because there's so many lessons to learn from these pets. And, Finn, it was devastated, but because he was my learning, like he was
Yeah,
my journey. He gave me so many lessons. And now I do things very differently. And I'm also a lot more aware of other things so I can help protect my current pets, but also like help educate people too. So I think, if you are going through something like Ashley is currently, there's a lot of different options out there. And also remember to give yourself grace, because it can be hard. And so many of us have been there personally too. But you're doing the best you can. And everything you do is going to like make a difference. Like, I know we can't always say like it gave them 10 years of time because I changed to a fresh food diet, but I can guarantee you it did something more than staying on like a processed food diet. So,
exactly.
no.
And to end that on a really adorable note, Maple, my daughter, has a little pug stuffed animal, and she calls it Lua. So that's
Oh, see, she
yeah.
knows.
And she actually, Kelly, the owner of Green Juju, gave me well, Lua was actually still alive and Maple was born. She gave me a blanket with like pictures of Lua all over it, so she
Oh my
sleeps with that
God.
too. So she's
Oh,
it is I will say, one of the best experiences of my life is watching Huckleberry and Maple become like best friends. It's just a
oh.
really cool. I'd highly recommend. Everyone watching this has dogs and cats, but if you have a kid, you need to have a dog too.
Yeah, I
So
agree. I mean, we don't have a kid. I just have lots of fur animals, but it's so cute, honestly, watching you, like anyone here who's on Instagram needs to follow Billy, because him and his daughter are the cutest things. And I think you asked her what who her best friend was.
yeah,
Is
and
she like Hucky?
yeah,
I was like, oh my God, I can't.
she calls him Hucky Boy. So she goes back and forth. The other day I was like, who's your best friend? She goes, Mama. And then I said, who else? Mama. Who else? Mama. And I was like, all right, well, I'm here
Hucky's out.
too.
Hucky and Billy are out.
Yeah, it's not me, but and also there's the bacterial aspect to having a dog as well, because
Yeah.
the dog is bringing a new set of probiotics into your house,
Yep.
and that aspect of it. So can't
Definitely.
remember how we got here, but
We were talking about, cancer and all the things. And I think
yeah.
but I think it also reiterates like it's not just about nutrition. Nutrition is like a pillar of health, right? It's
Hmm.
an important foundation, but there's all these other factors. Like this is the emotional health connection and the support that our pets give us, and also to the emotional health side. And I just love that. So, I think I've already taken 20 minutes over Billy's time. So, but
I'll be
which I appreciate.
I'll be on diaper duty soon, so we're good to go.
Yes, yes, I won't hold you any longer. And I know everyone here appreciated it. This will be available post this live. It'll be on our Facebook page, The Natural Pet Doctor. We will also be posting it out for anyone who registered. The recording, it'll be on YouTube also at Dr. Katie Woodley, The Natural Pet Doctor. I know Billy and Green Juju will also be posting some of the materials too. So don't worry, it's all here for you to rewatch, because there was a lot of great info that Billy shared with those ratios and how to look at your pets. And remember, just have fun with it. But I also wanted to finish, Billy, where can these amazing pet parents find those amazing products that you mentioned during the call?
Well, we have many amazing products, and we have a big announcement coming in March as
Mhm.
well. We're actually, if there's any store owners watching this, we're actually announcing that at Global in Florida, which is a big pet food show there. Then we will be announcing it online as well, and that's going to be a really huge product announcement. So we're excited about that. And then we're always working on stuff behind the scenes. So we're actually sold at, I believe, like 3,000 independent retailers across the country. And so if you go to our website and look to find a store, there is likely a store near you, no matter where you live, unless I believe Alaska is the only state we don't sell in. So even in Hawaii, you can find it. Still looking for that business trip there. But aside from that, Also a great way to check out your local economy and help a business owner who's really just giving so much to the community and so much of their time to research all these products. So shop local and check us out.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Billy. Thank you everyone for taking time out of your day to learn more and to join us. I'm Dr. Katie Woodley, the natural pet doctor, and I'm guessing we'll probably have Billy back. He's pretty amazing. So, and I'll get your town right eventually. Maybe third time's a charm, right?
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, have a good evening, everyone.
Yeah.
All right. Bye,
Thank
Billy.
you, everybody.